Well, hello everyone, and thank you for coming to my channel. Again, this is Alberto Marinas and Guzman. Let not forget that. And welcome to my channel. I'm going to be reviewing every chapter, not in detail of what's in the chapter, but perhaps more of some context that it's not in the book. So for those who are reading the book uh, first time or are thinking about reading the book, this context that I want to add will make the story maybe more alive, if you will. Okay, let's jump right into it. Today I will be reviewing chapter 2, and I start. So the chapter is called "Eat Every Fruit," and it's a phrase that my grandfather learned from Cuba's famous or infamous revolutionary leader Fidel Castro. And the story goes that Fidel told my grandfather, in whatever circumstance, eat every fruit that falls on your hands. And obviously, this is not a political statement whatsoever. It was meant to inspire a healthy lifestyle, a healthy eating habit, which my grandfather passed on to the family, right? And we were, I think, most of us absorb this phrase as coming from somebody who has world experience and world knowledge as something to follow. And in my family, we try to eat as many fruits as possible, right? It's a good memory, it's a good habit, and it reminds us of our beloved grandfather, who obviously not obviously, but passed away many years ago. His name was Andres Guzman, and the family history, family folklore, as I call it, says that his ancestors were part Spaniard, part native Taino indigenous people from Cuba. He had straight black hair, but he had a big nose and he was dark in complexion. Um, Rather quiet man, but fun. He was fun. Um, we're not really sure, and I have asked my uncles, I have asked all the relatives. We're not quite sure how my grandfather went from selling his mother's baked goods on the streets, as he called it, as he told us once or twice, with a panel on top of his head as a young boy carrying, his mother's baked goods. He went from there to being part of the security guard, personal protection for Fidel Castro after 1959. That's a gigantic jump. None of us is really sure how that happens. There are a few bits and pieces there. For example, he moved from Sancti Spiritus, in the center of Cuba, to Havana prior to 1959, and he was working in a factory. And it seems that he had joined the Orthodox political party, maybe one of the major political parties in Cuba at that time, but one of many. And we're not quite sure in what capacity was he part of this local party, but it couldn't have been much because he had very little education. I believe he completed maybe 4th, 5th grade in his childhood neighborhood town before he quit working to help the family, whether it was his father as a fisherman or his mom baking goods for sale. But all we know is that soon after 1959, he's the bodyguard. He's one of the bodyguards of Fidel Castro. Amazing story. I wish I knew more. I think in my family we all wish we knew more on how this came about. But more important than that, and more important than the Castro story, it's that For us, Andres Guzman was papita, and papita is Spanish for like little potato, but it's also a word that we use for kids. When kids are eating, we ask them to eat the little food, right? Eat the papita, right? And it seems that as when I was born, my grandfather would always come, to visit my mom and see me as a baby, and would ask in Spanish, of course, did you eat the papita? Did you eat all the papita? Anything related to did you eat all your food, right? As a baby. And I, as a child, kept hearing this word coming from his mouth, and then I named him Papita, right? And then next thing you know, the entire family calls him Papita. He went from Andres, and from my mom, dad or whatever, to being Papita. He just became Papita, and I think that was a cool story. There's more details on his rise and fall within the security detail for Castro, but I don't want to go into that. I think that's better read on the book than on my own. Another item that I touch in this chapter is living in Cuba with certain economic shortfallings, right? We were a small family. My brother, my mother, myself. We lived in this town in Santa Fe in Cuba. At some point, Papita came to live with us as he got older. There was also another grandfather, my dad's dad, who lived in another part of the city, and we would go visit him almost every Sunday. But as a family unit, it was just the three of us plus grandpa, right? His mom, my brother, myself, and grandpa. My dad migrated to the United States in 1986. I was 11, so way earlier in my life. His mom, my grandma, Nina, as we called her, she also migrated to the United States in 87. I'm sorry, 87. So shortly after my dad left in 86. She left in 87. So that part of the family unit was away and distant. And luckily they were, because my dad and my grandma, being fresh immigrants to the United States, didn't have much access to wealth, but they did send us remittance. They sent us anywhere from $500 to $1,000 a year, once a year, which my mom did magic with that money, right? My mom would stretch that money out as much as she could, because there was no way to know when the next cash infusion will come from my family in Miami. There was no way. We had no idea, no expectations. We just hoped it would be somewhat regularly. And again, my mom, I cannot give her enough credit for doing magic. Seriously, she would spread those dollars as much as she could. For example, we know, my brother and I, my mom, we know that we had in our home 3 meals a day, every day, which sounds quite normal, but in the early and mid 90s in Cuba, there were serious food shortcomings. That was the same time period right after the Russia, fell apart, and any subsidies that the Russian government was giving to Cuba disappeared. And suddenly, there were shortages. There were shortages on everything: sugar, rice, any core item of the Cuban table. It was in shortage. So there was a struggle. There was a struggle to put food on the table. I wouldn't say that we were satisfied with the meals. My brother and I, we were teenagers, and we were always hungry. Plus, we were active teenagers. My brother was in school. I was in school. I used to go sailing or running or doing weights in the backyard. I would do a little bit of swimming every once in a while, play racquetball. So we were quite active. and we were hungry, and the meals, the breakfast, the lunch, the dinner were small. They were small. They were not satisfactory. um, and early on, my brother and I would ask for seconds, and my mom found seconds until my brother and I figured out that my mom was giving us her food. That was heartbreaking. So my brother and I stopped asking for seconds. We ate whatever my mom put on the table, a lot, a little, tasty, not tasty. We ate everything and didn't ask for seconds because we knew that if we did, she would give us from her own, and that was not fair. That said, there were no snacks, right? We had 3 meals, period, no snacks. And we were lucky. We were very lucky. I didn't have a window into many of my fellow citizens or friends, into what they ate or how much they ate every day. But I can say that one of our immediate neighbors in the block where we lived, they had 1 meal a day. It was a big meal, something like a big lunch, right? But that was it. They had no breakfast, they had no dinner, and there were little kids in the house. There were little kids, like toddlers. If I recall, there were 2 toddlers in that household, and it broke my mom's heart to know that we had 3 meals and those little kids were having 1 meal a day. And it broke her heart because she's a very compassionate person, and she wanted to give them some of our food, right? And that makes sense. Except for any food that she contributed to this family would have been from my dish, from my brother's dish. It would have meant less food for us. So with all the pain in her heart, she couldn't, right? And I think she's still bothered by that. We talked about it recently. She's still bothered not being able to help kids, right? Not the adults, but the kids who had no fault. She had 2 kids of her own, right? So she knows what it's like to have a hungry baby, and it was painful. It was painful to know this, that some people, not alien to me, but like immediate neighbors, were only being fed once a day. So to go back to the dollars coming from Cuba, from Miami to Cuba, usually came in a cash envelope, with a friend or a relative of my family in Miami who came to visit Cuba for some reason, and they would bring packages for letters and whatnot for friends and other relatives. And one of those letters or package was for us. And sometimes they were closed, sometimes not. But most often there was some cash for us. And I recall one time in particular that we didn't know the person that came from Cuba, so from Miami, to Cuba. We didn't know this person, so we couldn't really go to their house. They couldn't go to our house. So we met them at a hotel. We met them at the Havana Libre, which is how it's called today. But back in the days, it was called the Hilton Havana, the Havana Hilton. And we went there. We met this gentleman there. He gave us an envelope, shook hands, and it was over. Right? We didn't have a relationship with him. And as we walked away, my mom was rather nervous to be walking around with an envelope full of US dollars. You may not know, but during this time in Cuba, it was illegal to have US currency. Obviously, my mom did not want to get in trouble with the law, nor she could afford to go to prison and then leave 2 teenage kids on their own, right? So she was rather nervous. And I said to her, I would say it was probably one of my early examples of thinking different and a little bit of courage, if you will. I asked her to give me the envelope, and I pulled up my pants, straight up my socks, and I put the envelope between my socks, right between my socks and my leg, and pushed the pants down. My thinking was that if for some reason a policeman saw us exiting this hotel, which is usually full of tourists, and why is an American, a Cuban, national living in this hotel, that could be, curious to the policeman, and would ask to search my mom or even my pockets. It was not in my pockets, right? So luckily nothing happened, but we were very tense the whole way home. In the bus, I kept touching with my other leg, making sure that envelope was still there, since that envelope meant, milk, rice, fish, bread, whatever my mom could come by with in the black market to bring to the table. So that's a story that I still remember vividly, and that it marked my early life, right, of having to think differently, of having to do things on my own accord, my own way. There is an okay, well, to the topic of not having enough meals and being constantly hungry. I remember many times coming from outside, right? My brother and I would just go out, meet with friends, play racquetball, go running, go to school, whatever it was. And I recall every once in a while just coming home and opening the refrigerator, instinctively looking for something to eat because I was hungry. And it was not lunchtime or dinner time yet. And obviously there was nothing there. I mean, most often than not, our refrigerator included a jar of cold water and perhaps a little bit of milk left from yesterday, or a little bit of butter, but there was nothing else in the refrigerator. My mom, every day she had to go outside and talk to neighbors, talk to friends, and see who was selling what in the black market. And that's what she made that day, whatever she found that very day. There was no long-term planning. Every day she had to go out and find whatever there was in the black market. Sometimes we found rice and we will buy 20 pounds of rice and we will make that last, right? But there was never a time when we had 20 pounds of rice and 20 pounds of beans and pork and no, there's no such thing. And if you speak to any Cubans from that era in Cuba, they would tell you that among the most difficult things to find was cooking oil, right? You can find rice and you can find beans and maybe you can find chicken or eggs or fish, since we live near the sea. But cooking oil was so hard to come by, as was soap, as was toilet paper. But to go back to the refrigerator, there is this term that Cubans use. We call it Hambre, Vieja, or in English would be old hunger. And we joke that when we come to the US, we overeat for years and years because we're trying to overcome this old hunger. And it is not just a curious thing, it is a trauma, right? If it has taken me at least 22, 25 years to figure out that this is a trauma, that I am traumatized, that I tend to overeat, not because I'm hungry, but because I used to be hungry when I was a teenager. And that was not fun. That was not fun. It had taken me, some time to realize that some of, if not most of my occasional overeating, it's compensating from this period of 3-5 years where I was constantly hungry and fed, but not satisfied. In the last portion of this chapter, I mentioned an encounter that I had right before I finished high school. So I usually don't miss school when I was in Cuba or here. I go to school sick if possible, but for some reason I missed school one day. I was in high school, probably 12th grade, final year. And when I come back the following day or so, my classmates tell me that the the Communist Youth Party, which is like a feeding, right, to the National Communist Party, had been going classroom by classroom looking for nominations to join the party. And of course, my friends wanted nothing to do with that, so they recommended to these youth party representatives that they recommended this guy who wasn't there, me. So now I have this nomination to join the national, the youth party, the Youth Communist Party of Cuba, and I am 100% aware that I want to leave this country, that I want to make a life in the United States, and it's no good. This is no good for me. I know that I cannot have this. Of course, I am still living in Cuba as a day-to-day Cuban, and I cannot refuse, right? You cannot refuse this honor, right? And I had to figure out a way to get away from this appointment that I didn't want. I remember I participated in one meeting, like an introduction. It was in school, in the high school. I don't know, maybe there were like 20, 30 of us. I can't remember what the young man said up front. All I was thinking was, how do I get away from this? How do I shake this off? I don't want this on me. I don't want to migrate to the United States or any country in the world and be known as a member of the youth party, the Youth Communist Party. So I came up with a plan. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell my brother. I told no one. I found out, can't remember how, where was the local Communist Youth Party office. And I, perhaps on a day of school, I cannot remember the details. It was too long ago. But I went there. I took the bus. I went to the building. I went to the front desk, and I asked the front lady, who do I speak to if I want to give up my membership? And the lady looked at me with big eyes, like she has never heard this before. And I was expecting all of that. As a matter of fact, I was expecting perhaps physical abuse. I was expecting maybe being pushed around or worse. I had no idea what to expect. I was expecting something bad to happen to me, but I wanted at the end of this episode to be free from it, whatever it was, whether they questioned me hard, whether they slapped me around or I didn't care if it got physical. I knew that at the end of this episode, I wanted nothing to do with it. So the front desk lady walked away and came back a few minutes later with, I'll say, about 3 guys and a young lady, maybe in their 20s, late 20s. And they ushered me into another room. If I recall, I sat on a chair and they were standing around the room, not close to me, maybe against the wall, but it was just, a small room. And they asked me, why do you want to give up this privilege? Why do you want to give up this honor that was bestowed upon you by your classmates? And obviously, before I came there, I knew I couldn't just tell them, hey, I want to leave the country. I want to immigrate. I want to go to the United States. I want nothing to do with you. Of course, I cannot say that. But it had to be an excuse that if I didn't migrate to the United States as early as I wanted to, and I had to make a life in Cuba, that it would be permissible for me, right? For example, if you lose your membership to the youth party, you will never be accepted into a college or university in Cuba. It would be very difficult for you to find employment, and if you did, there would never be a promotion for you, right? So it was a good thing to have if you were going to have a life in Cuba. Not have it was equally acceptable, but losing it was unacceptable. So my plan was to lie. I lied to them. I told them, I said, look, I appreciate the feedback from my classmates. I appreciate the trust and confidence from my classmates that they saw me as honest, ethical, smart enough to join the party. But what my friends at school don't know is that I'm a Jehovah's Witness. And Jehovah's Witnesses are notorious for not being able to accept party memberships, salute the flag, etc., etc. This is a total fabrication. I have no relationship with the Jehovah's Witnesses, but I was hoping that, obviously, in a pre-computer database time, I could get away with making such statement and them having no way to check if it's true or not. We went back and forth a little bit more, but it was not friendly, but not it was neutral, right? Kind of tone of voice, where they were insisting that I could still see it as a benefit and as a price for my good behavior and for being a good student. And I mentioned to them, I accept it. I accept this as a good price and as a reflection of myself as a good student, as a good classmate, as a leader in the classroom. But religiously, I cannot accept it. And I held my ground there. And within 5-10 minutes, I was out. They escorted me to the front desk again. And I started walking towards the door, and I said, wait, go back. And I asked them, should I sign something? I wanted proof that I was done with this, right? I wanted proof that I had nothing to do with them ever again. And they said, no, we would handle it administratively, internally, and you're good to go. I walked out, crossed the street, made a right towards the bus stop to take the bus home. And that's when I started shaking. I started shaking so bad. I had, my heart was pounding super fast. I had to lean on the bus stop seat and just sit there and hold my breath. It was quite a daring exercise, to go face the Youth Communist Party and tell them in their face that I wanted to give up the membership that my classmates bestowed upon me, and to lie to them to their face that I was a Jehovah's Witness when I have nothing whatsoever to do with this religion, because I knew my future was better. I knew I could do better. I knew I had a better future ahead of me, and this was going to stop me from that. And talking about my future, I want to wrap up with a quick story, and I hope it makes as much sense to you as it did to me back then, and it still does today. I recall I asked my immediate neighbor in Santa Fe, an engineer, nice guy, Martin is his name. I asked him, Martin, excuse me, if you were me, right? If you were me, would you leave the Cuba and go to the United States? And I briefly explained, look, we have a pretty house. It's small, but it's pretty. We live near the sea in Santa Fe, right? We eat 3 meals a day. My father sends me, a few dollars. My father and my grandma sent me some clothes, so we had clothes to wear. A lot of, fellow classmates, neighbors, did with much less than we did. They didn't have new clothes like we did every year or so. And you could say that we lived well for being in Cuba, right, under these conditions in 1994. And I said to him, should I give this up, right? This limited status, relatively better than those around me, for the unknown in the United States, right? I knew nothing about the United States. All I knew was that there was more of everything. All I knew from the United States was a phone call with my dad or my grandma of 10 minutes every month or so, which it was more of a familial, family catch up call. It was not, tell me about this country, tell me about your work, tell me about the culture, tell me about it. Nothing. So all I knew about the United States came from movies. And in the movies, there's always a lot of rich people, but there's also very poor people, like homeless. There's a lot of drugs. There's a lot of homicide. So as an 18-year-old, I'm thinking, should I give up this relative comfort for this big unknown with a lot of upswing, but also a very bad area, and a very bad space is also there for people, right? And he looked to the side, thought a little bit, and said, it's better to be a slave there than a prince here. And I like those very, very short, pieces of wisdom, because they capture so much, right? And that is exactly what he was saying, right? You're better off taking your chances in that country and maybe spend all your life as a servant, right? In the lowest levels of society. You're better off with that choice than staying here as a relative prince, right? Staying here, and even though you have 3 meals a day and you have jeans to put on, and your neighbors and your friends may not, it's not worth it. You're much better off taking that chance into the unknown, because the upswing is huge, right? You could end up as a servant, but maybe you could end up as a prince, and that is incomparable to what you have here. So that was my final piece of doubt that I cleared up before I decided that it's time for me to go. I can't. I will not make plans to continue my life in this country. And as soon as I had the chance, I jumped on the raft and left Cuba, as you know. Well, again, I just want to recap. I'm going to be providing some context to each of the stories that I go through on my book. And feel free to comment below, ask me questions directly. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. And again, any questions about the book, any questions about my story, the book is available on Amazon, but feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions, if you have any similar stories that happened to you. I know there's a lot of Cuban rafters out there who may be reading my book, and also people who may not, and also be very interested in the story. Thank you. Remember, like, comment, and subscribe. And bye.